Can we just, before we get into the Minnesota-Denver thing, spend some time on Durant? Because we haven't really done it yet.
Yeah, it hurts, but I'm ready to do it.
Go ahead.
Because he got swept this year. Last year, lost, forced his way out of Brooklyn, ends up losing in round one. Year before, gets swept. Year before, foot on the line against Milwaukee. Year before, no playoffs.
They made it to round two
gets
last
hurt in the
year.
finals. Round two, sorry. Yeah, I mean, when you think of where he was in 2019 before he hurt his calf, when he was averaging 35 a game the first series and a half, he was in that Houston series, and he just was unequivocally the best player in the world. And since then, he's been one of the best 10 to 12 players in the world, but has not been at that same level. And now he's going to be 36 years old next year. I don't love the situation he's in. I don't know how they improve the team, and we'll see if he stays. Not great though. Not a great not a great last 5 years, Russillo. I don't feel good about it, to answer your question.
The whole thing feels pretty ugly because, last year they got the scare from L.A. Clippers, but then, George isn't playing, Kawhi gets hurt, and then they're basically like, hey, Westbrook, let's go. OKC Westbrook. You get all his possessions. Right. Westbrook puts up big numbers. It still ends up only being a 5-game series. And then they get 2-2 with Denver. And if you remember, Booker was going crazy.
3 and 4. One of those games, what did they average? They scored 100 points combined or 90 points combined in game 3. It was some crazy number.
No, it's an absurd number. So it's
or 89, something
86.
Like that. Yeah.
86. Booker went 20 of 25 for 47
Jesus.
points and 9 assists, 3 turnovers.
And then Denver just turned it on the next 2.
Yeah, and then in that series, because you're kind of like, all right, well, they got it to 6 with the eventual champs. It's like, yeah, but they got blasted in 3 of those games. But you don't think that this is happening, okay? And then you're probably thinking, all right, well, Durant will have been here longer. They'll figure it all out. We'll have these 3 guys that are really good scorers. That's what really matters in the playoffs. And I can't help but think of this, whatever this chapter is we're on with Durant, it's got to count for something, because I thought he was really good tonight, but man, watching Ant just take over these quarters, and you're going, shouldn't Durant have a couple of these quarters?
Yeah.
And it's not so much even about the sweep. Now, I don't know if I'm missing something, because the overall numbers, look, when you're a 1 or 2 option, you're still going to get your 20 plus points.
But this was the case of the Boston series 2 years ago. Remember, Tatum was just better than him for a week and a half. Still outplayed him. The last time he was really at the level you're talking about was that Bucks series.
Right.
And that was in 2021, which is 3 years ago. But, his 2007 draft. He's been in the league. Is this his 17th season? It's kind of crazy. So that the guy that we have in our heads, just because it's this weird thing that happens sometimes in sports where the guy gets older, but he looks exactly alike. I remember this happened with Jerry Rice, where it wasn't really Jerry Rice anymore, but it still looked like Jerry Rice. So you're like, oh, it's still Jerry Rice when he was in the Raiders, but it wasn't really Jerry Rice anymore. I don't think that's the case with KD, because KD still statistically was awesome. But what you're talking about is there's a 5-6% decline's the wrong word, but he's just not, he can't match baskets with somebody like Ant in the same way. When Ant's feeling like that, it's like Durant's not like, okay, now I'm going to throw some punches. We don't see that in the same way. And maybe it's part of Booker. He's on Booker's team too. And maybe there's stuff he doesn't want to do from a takeover standpoint. I don't know. Maybe he's just older. But I'm with you. There's something slightly disappointing about it.
And he went for 30 twice. Game 2 was bad. He ends up with 25 and 4. The shooting numbers are fine except for 3. But, his shooting splits are still exactly what you'd expect them to be, 55, 42. Gets to the free throw line a bunch. My idea of what he is, the idea of what Ishbia thought he was doing when he makes this trade, because I don't blame an owner for being like, if I just say yes right now, I get Kevin Durant on my basketball team. But to watch it feel like it's like, oh, okay, you got some numbers, but when was When was it so clear he was the best player? When did it seem like he was completely in control, that the other team had no answer for him? And it just doesn't feel like that enough with him, especially when there's a guy on the other team that's doing those things.
Yeah. Well, and there's also more good offensive players now.
Yeah.
You know, that might be a small piece of it, but they never figured out. One of the things I thought with the Suns is they never figured out what their best five was and what that looked like. And sometimes I almost thought in my head, maybe it was Durant at the five, which is the matchup. That was the lineup I thought they were going to go at in this Minnesota series to try to like turn it on Minnesota a little bit, little smaller, little Golden State 2017-ish, but it just didn't work.
This game was so bad for everybody that, I mean, nobody else had double figures. You know, nobody could hang on to the basketball. There's just so many moments in these games. You're like, what are you guys doing? And then guys got scared to shoot on top of everything else. I mean, I'm surprised.
Can I say something that's really important?
Oh, I'm going to listen.
Because this happened with the 2011 Heat too. And every once in a while, these teams, they load up with the 2 or the 3 expensive guys. And then they're like, no, we're going to be able to build around these guys. And we're smarter than everybody else. We're going to be able to build, you know, we'll find 8. You only need like 4 or 5 more role players and we're going to be great. And then we get to a situation like this and it's like, yeah, we just didn't have enough around those guys. We got to really build around. And it's like, yeah, this is what happens when you spend $150 million on 3 guys. You end up with like Josh Okogie in big spots, you know? You end up with no point guard. You just don't have a point guard. I do think they miss Grayson, and maybe he would have swung one game, and they lucked out with the fact that Grayson was so good this year, considering where I think all of us were on him heading into that trade. But when you go all in on guys, I've been saying this with the Lakers too, like you know, you're going to spend $105 million on Davis and LeBron. Guess what? You got to roll the dice with D'Angelo Russell. You know, you got to roll the dice with Rui Hachimura. That's how it goes. You're not just going to be able to build a super team. So I think people forget that over and over again. It's really with the situation you want to be in is like where Minnesota was, where they at least were able to draft a couple of the guys they had. That's where Boston was, or where Denver was, where you have some of these guys on your team already when you're building around that, versus where Phoenix is, where the only guy that's, you know, as a homegrown guy is Booker. Everyone else is gone or traded, or like, do you think about like that Jalen Smith, that could have been Halliburton, all of these moments that they had to build the team around. They just didn't have it.
No, and especially getting rid of Bridges and, you know, Cam, and then, you know, the Durant trade, where I don't know if we're doing any of this now, but you bring up that Miami comparison, but at least they were losing to Dallas in the NBA Finals, okay?
True.
And you still, if you're Riley, you're like, what can we do? Like, okay, we'll put those 3 guys together and we'll figure out the rest of it a little bit later on.
But they really had the 5 because they also had Mike Miller and they had Haslam and they had Chalmers. Like on paper, that made more sense than that. But then when it actually got into it, they didn't have, Dallas had more depth and LeBron sucked in the finals. And that was why.
That's
and
it.
Dirk was good. But once they added Ray Allen, it, you know.
I don't, you know, when I looked at that team and you go like, oh, well, they could have done this. I mean, you made it to 4 straight finals. We're talking about a team that just got swept. And I was thinking,
round 1.
Right. And I was thinking about the story because you and I were both doing, you know, it's not the Vegas Super Bowl. I was in Phoenix for that one because it was a trade deadline. We were texting being like, I think this is happening. Yeah. And then we tape the pod and you're kind of like, I just can't help myself. And then I'm like, okay, well, you just added Kevin Durant. But then when the story started coming out a little bit more about how it went down, it's like, well, Durant was adamant that he didn't want to turn it into some open market thing. And I'm like, well, if I'm the Nets, I'm going, well, your 4-year extension just kicked in. You wanted the coach, you wanted me fired. So, you know, apologies if we don't want to fucking acquiesce to every one of your demands here because you're burning us with a 4-year extension left on this thing. Yeah. And so we knew that part of it, or at least the part that was told. And then you think of what was given up and you go, okay, so then it's all these firsts, because it just feels like anybody of this magnitude's like the 4 first and maybe a swap on top of everything else. And then it's like, okay, but it's also Cam Johnson, who's a nice role player. And then it's Mikal, who, you know, felt better about last year. I still think there's a lot of stock in Bridges. And you're like, but who are you bidding against if Durant was saying that I only wanted to do this way. I mean, did
We both-
Ishbia just get worked?
Well, when we did the pod after, I think we both said, "Yeah, you kind of have to do it. You have to get Kevin Durant."
I know
but,
I said it. I know I said it. So
no, we both said it, but
Right.
we also said that's a lot, and you don't have a lot of outs now. Like if this doesn't 100% work, there's not a lot of moves left. If these two guys don't work with Ayton and Paul, what's your next move? And then when they did the Beal thing, that was I was out on the Beal trade. I did not like it. And I thought they
But you get
ruined
why they
basically
did it.
all their outs.
because like Durant leaves you less out. So it's like, okay, well, we may as well add somebody in Beal from a talent standpoint that is going to be better
but
than
then
any
they
other
did the
transaction.
Ayton for Nurkic and Grayson. And I don't know.
But they were so done with Ayton. They were just.
I get it.
Ayton,
but once
I think
they
Ayton
did
gave
all
them plenty
those
of
moves, they had
evidence.
nothing left. There were no other moves. That's your team.